episode 120 of Talkoffamepod podcast with their host, Kyliemontigney. And on today's episode, I'm very excited to have on host of the Wake Up Conservative podcast, Anna Morris. Thanks so much, come on, Anna. I'm so excited to speak with you again.
Thank you, Kylie, for inviting me on. I'm happy to have this opportunity and I'm glad to talk about everything that we're going to dive into today.
Me too. And so, you have created the Wake Up Conservative podcast, which brings a biblical perspective that woke narrative the world is trying to feed you. With your passion for politics and media, how did you come to the conclusions to start a podcast to use your voice on these topics?
Yeah, so I am the host of the Wake Up Conservative podcast, and I essentially market my podcast on Instagram and Facebook and pretty much any social media platform I can. And the reason why I started it was back in 2020, we had a pandemic, and I think that kind of just awoke a lot of people to so many different things. And I wouldn't necessarily stick it to politics necessarily. I would also add in faith-based content because I think the church really took a seat when the pandemic happened. And I don't say that lightly because we are humans and we do mess up, and we have to give the leaders in our church grace when that happens. At the same time, we do have a biblical standard in the Bible that just essentially kind of shows believers what to do when things like that happens. And so I'm so glad to see that so many churches have bounced back from this pandemic and they are now doing in-person worship, and people are now feeling the effects of community again, which is a big thing that 2020 took away from us. So I think just seeing so many devastating things happen from 2020 to 2021 into 2022 as well, and just kind of going forward, I wanted to be outspoken about these things. And I want to say this very lightly because there are a lot of people who are just like me and who were just like me, where I would have never seen myself start a podcast, be open on social media about my faith, about politics, anything like that. And it took a lot of prayer on prayer on prayer, and listening to the convictions God was giving me to build up that confidence. And I actually wrote down a verse that spoke to me even in 2020 that still speaks to me today. And it's 1 John 5:14. And it says, "This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything to his will, he will hear us." And I think that is just such a beautiful verse that says, if we are willing to follow God's will for our life, he will give us the tools to do it, and he hears us too. And so I think that's just beautiful to dwell on, sitting back about 2.5 years later from starting this whole journey. And I know so many other content creators like Kylie as well, who have just built this from the ground up, starting probably in 2020. And it's so fun to see all these creators and where they're going now.
And I love what you said, with the pandemic, you didn't anticipate on starting a podcast, and as I talked about this a couple weeks ago on your podcast, I had no anticipation on starting a podcast at all. It was just something kind of the pandemic really raised me to do, made me to do. And with politics and stuff, politics made me love it during the pandemic, because as you said, there was a bunch of things that happened 2020, 2021, 2022 that was hard, and there was some good, there was some bad. And that's really one of the reasons I started. So I'm sure this is for you too, that with everything politics and raising your faith and really talking about these things, because some people don't think oh my God, why can't I talk about politics? Or why can't I talk about the pro-life movement or Black Lives Matter, or all these things are happening, all these wonderful movements. And with some people, they're so scared to talk about these things. But with the things some other people are doing, you, and to see some people really raise their voice and listen, talk about these topics, because politics is such a hard thing. It's a world where you basically get judged on what you're saying or what you believe in. It's just no matter what you say or what you do, you get judged if you're in the politics movement.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that it's a big conversation. I love to think of podcasts in that way because even though there are some people who have created podcasts and have started this where their voices are out there, I think of it as just a big conversation because not necessarily is everyone right. Like in my stance, I haven't been right all the time. And there are
Mhm.
times I have to go back and be like, hey, I messed up on this. I took a stance too soon and I learned from it. And I say that openly on my podcast and I hope others will too. But as humans, there are so many ways to fault in politics
Mhm.
because I think a lot of people love to jump on the bandwagon really quickly without knowing so much information. And so that's what I've learned through podcasting is wait it out at least a week and see what happens. Read into the news stories, read into the actual story itself from the family members or from what's happening in legislation. It just depends. But that's what I've learned as a creator is to just kind of wait it out and see and kind of think before you speak, which is also biblical. Um,
Mhm.
so there are so many things that you can learn on these journeys as being a creator.
Yeah, exactly. Like I love what you said. Like with like when you say something, like you would think like, oh my God, like why did I say that? Like why did I say that even though I don't know the facts? Like some people, like you said, like to hit, like go on a bandwagon and say like, oh, I want to be like pro-life or pro-choice just because these people are pro-life or pro-choice. Like I want to follow on the bandwagon because they are these like
Exactly.
type of choices. But then like you like just because they believe in that doesn't mean you believe in that. Like you might have some differences in that. And I have said some things I'm like, why the hell did I say that? Like why did I say that thing that I don't know much information on? You know what I mean? And like you just like you don't know about a topic. If you want to learn about the topic, that's what Google is for. You know what I mean? That's what the internet's for. But then like with like some things that are happening, like you don't know that much until you kind of look into it. Like some people like to say, "Oh, I'm pro-life," or "I'm
Mhm.
pro-choice," or "I believe in Black Lives Matter," or something. But then like you don't like you say that but don't know information about it. If you believe in it and you're like, okay, well I am pro-life, like that's kind of like the key of information is for.
Mhm. And it's a great way. It's a foundation for sure. I encourage, especially because I specifically am pro-life because I've done my research, but um, I think a lot of the pro-life movement has phrases just like the pro-choice movement, and they don't know the statistics behind it. So I know we are going to talk a little bit about Roe v. Wade, so I'm excited to dive into that one.
Mhm. Yeah, like with Roe v. Wade, like as you kind of bring that up, like how do you think things have changed since it was overturned back in last like mid last year? Like how do you think was overturned? Like do you think it made things worse or better with like the pro-life movement or pro-choice movement or for today's society?
For sure. So I love diving into this topic, especially because coming up to the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case,
Mhm.
um, YWA, which is a organization I'm affiliated with, um, Young Women for America. Acronyms don't mean anything to people anymore.
Mhm.
Young Women for America, we prayed so hard over that case because it was essentially going back to our founding fathers and saying that no, abortion isn't a constitutional right, which essentially was what Roe v. Wade was. They did it on the liability of the mom. And so we prayed over it and we were just so invested into the judges who were reviewing the case. And I think there's so many things that people don't know happened leading up to Roe v. Wade. So that was one of them. That was one of the cases that happened that kind of led up to that reversal. But some statistics I want to read off is abortion in Texas, this isn't surprising because I'm from Texas. And
Mhm.
right before Roe v. Wade was overturned, we had a heartbeat bill, which essentially said that if a heartbeat's detected, which is even now it's before 16 weeks of pregnancy, you can not abort that baby,
Mhm.
which essentially makes moral sense. If you know the baby's alive, which is by heartbeat, you can't kill it. And so I personally am a person who believes that at conception, a baby is a baby, which is a human life, and
Mhm.
that's where I stand. But statistically, abortions in Texas have plummeted nearly 99% months after the Dobbs ruling. So that means that a lot of Planned Parenthoods were shut down. There weren't really any to start with, probably in some bigger cities. I'm thinking like Houston, Austin, don't quote me on this, Dallas, things like that. There are probably some still lingering in those cities in Texas, but for the most part, it has been taken away, which kind of just brings up the concern of what happens to those moms. And that's a big
Mhm.
concern. And so, one of the biggest things that the pro life movement has been doing lately is setting up pregnancy resource centers more than they have been. To be honest, there are pretty much a pregnancy resource in every city in this
Mhm.
country. If you look them up, they're there. And the reason why they are there is to help women in need. And I think that there's not a lot of people talking about those because
Mhm.
a lot of news media organizations were talking about, oh, the overruling of Roe v. Wade means that women are going to be dying and their babies are going to be dying, this whole
Mhm.
dramatic effect. But the fact of the matter is that these women have help. It just depends on if they're willing to reach out, if the people there are willing to help. It is in those cases, but if those don't work out, there all are always people online. I know I did a interview with Christy Jurgen. She has a um, organization called Hope Village, which essentially gathers money together from followers on Instagram and sends baby clothes, baby formula, wipes, supports moms, gets people from the local area of that mom to help with babysitting, with getting a job, helping write interview topics, different things like that to essentially plunge that mom into success. And so that's such a beautiful thing. And I know she's not the only one. There's students for life. There's studentsaction.org, I think. There's so many. And so the last one I want to say is from the New York Times, which this is nationally. The first 2 months, abortions declined by more than 10,000, which is 6%, which 6% doesn't seem like a lot, but on a monthly basis, if there are 10,000 abortions being canceled, then that's a big win in itself
Mhm.
that moms are keeping their babies, that humans are living. And so that's just a beautiful thing. I just wanted to talk about that. And then the last thing is if y'all want to get more information on this, I was looking at Pew Research, which is a great tool, and they have
Mhm.
statistics, they have the big graphics. I probably couldn't tell you about all of them, but it has the linear, and it looks like now the abortion rates are going down when it was
Mhm.
going up in the 1970s about. So that's a beautiful thing to see as well. Um, I think that's pretty much it. I know that it's really hard to talk about the abortion topic. I have been talking to people online, in person, different things like that since I was the age of 14. I remember getting comments on that because I used to be on YouTube on some of my posts saying like I'm a mom, I'm in need, I need this stuff, and just kind of walking her through the steps at 14 of things. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that it doesn't matter what age you are. You could be 92, you could be 13, and you still have the ability to help moms across the country with getting supplies. As long as you have a voice and you use it, God can use that in you.
Exactly. Like I love what you said, like with like the whole process, like it doesn't matter if you're 13 or you're 20 or you're like 80 years old, like you can still use your voice and help mothers and their in need. Either they're having a difficult pregnancy or they're just having a hard time whether like, oh, what should I keep this baby or should I not? Like like with the higher rates, like the higher like abortions was much bigger before Roe v. Wade even happened. Now, like you said, like it went down since it was overturned. And with Roe v. Wade overturned, a lot of people thought the road was ending. A lot of people thought, like, oh my gosh, like why is this like happening? Like what this is the stupidest idea I ever heard. Like, why are they overturning this? Like women are having difficult pregnancies. Like you may never know, like these babies might not survive this, but you may never know. Like I seen a post sometime today, earlier this morning, and this baby wasn't supposed to be born. Like it had like a birth defect or something. There's something like wrong with it, and the doctors didn't think he was gonna survive. That he was gonna pass away, and like he ended up like being birthed, and he was breathing, he was crying, he was fine, and ended up living for like 7 weeks. Like that's how you know like the prayer of God. You may never know how things happen. Doctors may say like, oh, these babies are not gonna be born, they might be alive, they might die at birth. But
Mhm.
then like you see these amazing things, like this baby lived up to 7 weeks and he was supposed to die in the womb or stuff and stuff like that. Like you see all these miracles happening, but then like you think like, oh my God, baby should be born. But then you see all these miracle babies happening and you think like, oh my God, this is what like having kids are for. Like miracles are supposed to happen.
I think it also just makes the big argument of why would we be allowed to have life and you don't allow someone else to have life. It's essentially like I go back to the moral argument of would you as a baby want your either parents or the doctor that's taking care of you or while you're in your mother's womb to say or have the voice for you to say no, you're not allowed to live. And I think that touches a lot of hearts because no, if you were a baby in the womb and you had a voice to say something about either if you lived or you died, um, you would obviously want to live no matter the challenges you face. I think of the Down syndrome community and how
Mm-hmm.
beautiful their stories are because so many doctors, especially OBGYNs, have told moms for decades now that because your child has this quote unquote defect, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to lessen their value of life, and that
Mm-hmm.
is so not true. We've seen so many kiddos with Down syndrome make it
Mm-hmm.
to extreme like links, like some have become doctors, some are now speech pathologists, which is so
Mm-hmm.
amazing because they're going back and helping so many who were just like them. And so I just think that in this era, I would say, of young women who are speaking out about my body, my choice, there needs to be some accountability where you say, when does it stop being about me and it can be about others as well? Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of posts that I see that are like me, I need my body and I have the right to make my choice. It's more of a selfish persona, which I know a lot of people will be rubbed a little bit the wrong way when I say that, but if you sit there and you think about it, because I've done this with so many things. It's not even abortion, it's about my faith. Like I sit here and I'm like, I'm being so selfish. And so
Mm-hmm.
when we sit there and we dwell on what actions we've been taking and what words we are speaking, that's when our gears start to turn in our head and we're like, okay, like to be empathetic and to be encouraging to others, we have to put ourselves a little bit lower than everyone else so that we can uplift others. And I think even without faith, that's such a good concept to live by because in a world that we want peace instead of violence and
Mm-hmm.
in a world where we want um, life instead of death, we have to think of others instead of ourselves.
Exactly. Like so with some people they think like, oh my gosh, like you said, like my body, my choice. Like once you become pregnant, they think that, but then you realize that like I am pregnant, I'm having a child, and some people want to have kids, some don't. Like people have different opinions. But then like you said, like you have to think of like why you want your body. Like
Hmm.
you grew up like with your body your whole life and it's okay if you're struggling with body, like with your body, living in your body. Everyone suffers with that. I suffer with that as well. Like everyone suffers with it. And like it's something I don't speak about often because of course I'm still struggling with it and it's something that I'm trying to deal with as well as speak about it. And as well as having a kid, like it can deal with some more body issues, of
Hmm.
course, as you have a kid, but then like having a kid is the biggest blessing in the world. Like I like having a baby and having a kid that you raise and love for the rest of your life. Like it's really the best feeling in the entire world.
Yep. I totally agree. Lately, I have been, I just kind of want to share this. I have been contemplating, like, do I really want a career? Do I really want to go to college? Because the only thing in my heart that God has laid is to be a mom and to adopt and to foster and to do all these things that I necessarily would have thought of maybe 2 years ago. And so it's just so beautiful how God can change the heart of women because I was in that kind of not feminist group, but in that kind of mindset where I was like,
Mm,
I need to go get a career. I need to climb the corporate ladder. I need to be successful for myself. And again, that was just selfish thinking. And now God has changed my heart, and I want to be a mom. I see the beauty in life. I see the
mm,
beauty of having kids, because I think there are some people who are like they watch families from a distance and they're like, oh my gosh, this is not for me. I can't do this. Like
mm.
I can't be a mom.
Yeah.
I can't be a dad, whatever. But just trust me in saying that if you pray on it and if you kind of think through it, there's so much beauty. Like Kylie said, having children is the biggest blessing.
Mm,
And the more and more you observe mom and dads around you, the more and more you will feel qualified and prepared to be and step into that role. And then also just follow godly counsel when it comes to parenting, because everyone's on the same road that you are. It's always you have the baby and then it's go and learn from there. You're always
yeah.
learning. And so every child's different. Every kid needs something different to learn and grow. And so beautiful to think about that. But that kind of just ties into the pro-life community as well, where we
Mm,
just uplift life. And I think that it's not just we're pro-birth, we're pro-life, where we
mm,
are going to be with you every step of the way. Wherever you need someone,
mm,
we're there.
exactly. And like as I kind of circle back to your podcast,
Mhm.
like you have interviewed some amazing guests in politics, around in like faith and all these things. Like, do you have a favorite guest or the like something that was memorial to you?
Well, I feel like I should say you.
That's so sweet.
But yes, Kylie's interview was amazing. I honestly stepped away from that interview encouraged and revived. I think that's what made me so excited about this season 4 launch, is that I wasn't in the beginning, I wasn't excited, but now just seeing so many people pour in their knowledge and pour in their love into this podcast and so many other podcasts. Because I just did an interview with Bex over at Branding with Bex podcast. And so just seeing all of this work together for God's glory is amazing. I loved doing the Jordan and David Price interview, which they
Mm,
are the heads of Turning Point Faith.
mhm,
And that was just so inspiring to hear their faith and how they have grown as a couple and so many challenges they've faced together. I can't pinpoint my favorite, because I could tell you, I could sit down and tell you through each interview what I loved, what I took away. I'm always taking away things from interviews. I'm learning from different people. The beautiful thing about having episodes and bringing people on instead of doing it by yourself is that you can make a community where you can say, hey, like, I want to do another interview. Is there anybody you know that I could interview? And so that way you're making connections and it's just a
mhm,
beautiful line down the road. I would say the biggest thing about podcasting is don't gatekeep, which means if someone needs something, like if you know someone who would be an amazing guest for their podcast, don't gatekeep. Send them your information. Of course, like respect the person's privacy and ask them first, but don't be someone who's like, I've built up this success and I just want to keep it for myself.
mhm,
Be someone who is always sharing, especially with those who are younger, who are just starting out. It would be so helpful for them. But yeah, so interviews are one of the most beautiful things I've learned about podcasting. We've talked about different topics like pro-life, we've talked about gun control, we've talked
mhm,
about um, policies being made and legislation, we've talked about faith, we've talked about God, we've talked about hardships,
mhm,
we've talked about how to live a healthy life, how to get rid of toxic metals in your life. There are so
mhm.
many things we've talked about, and it's just been such a beautiful journey. But what about you? What has been your favorite interview?
Yeah, like you said, like I really like enjoyed like every single interview. Like you said, like with every interview, like you really like take away different things from each interview. Like you learn from every person you interview, you learn their journey, you learn their beliefs, you learn about their life. Like you learn different things in different aspects. Like well for me, like I love doing this episode with you. My previous episodes, I love doing interview with Madison Watkins. I adored her before I even had her on. Giles Marini, Caroline Smith. Like there's so many people I love. Like I wish I could say I can go on. Like there's like a whole list. But
Yes.
then like those are kind of like some of my favorite interviews if I can name some. But like with any interview, like every interview is my favorite. Like there's really no Pacific interview that like I hate or love. Like of course there are some awkward interviews. You're like, well, why did I do this? Like why did I do this interview and stuff like that? But that's like a part of the journalism world. Like you're like, oh, why did I say that? Why did I ask this question? I wish I like asked better questions. But then like as a journalist, like there's still time to grow as a journalist, no
Mhm.
matter how old you are. You might be 22, you might be in the 50s, you might be 15, like no matter how you are, like you still have time to grow. I'm still growing as a journalist and I've been doing this for almost 2 years. Like there's
Yeah.
always still time to grow. And like with interviews, like with like we talked many topics, like there's so many topics we talked about, but then like no matter how many guests I had on, everyone is like I learned something different each interview,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, I resonate with that because there are some times where it's like awkward and it's probably on my end where I'm like, I ask the wrong question or I stutter or something like that. But I
Mm-hmm.
just think back to the story of Moses in the Bible where he's
Mm-hmm.
like, God, no, I can't speak for you. And God's like, I literally gave you a voice. Like I am the person who gave you a voice. Please be the person on earth who can take the Israelites out of Egypt. And I dwell on that because Moses was where I was at in 2020. I was like, no, God, I can't do this. People are going to make fun of me. I'm not going to be cool anymore or anything like
Mm-hmm.
that. But ultimately, it's dying to myself, which sounds so crazy, but
Mm-hmm.
I can explain it. Dying to yourself essentially means that you are letting go of that selfishness, letting go of the worldly desires you hold, which I think every believer kind of goes through, where they're like, oh my goodness, like I'm not following God's word. I'm not following who God wants me to be. And it's picking up your cross and following him daily. I've said that over and over again in my head the past few years. I'm like, I'm dying to myself, I'm picking up my cross and following him daily. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what has essentially moved me towards being more confident, being steady in prayer, being able to be community for others, because if you're not doing well, you can't be there for others. And so doing that on a daily basis has helped me be strong through hard times, be prayerful for others, and it's been a beautiful process. But I think that podcasting is just, it is what it is. It's beautiful. It's a come and go process. It doesn't depend on the people who are on with you, because everybody has something to give and everyone has something to go and take away from it. So I think that's a beautiful process.
Mm-hmm. And like I wanted to ask you, like, what is like some advice to women are kind of contempting abortions or want to have abortions? Like, what is some advice kind of for them that want to have basically kids but are really kind of contempting about having an abortion?
Yeah. So my story is that I was adopted when I
Mm-hmm.
was at the age of 2, and to kind of backtrack from that, I was abandoned by my birth mom, which essentially what we think is that she was in one of those situations that a lot of women find themselves in, where it's like, I don't have enough money to take care of this baby. I don't have the safety and protection that it needs. I need safety and protection. Um, and I'm saying that from my mom's perspective, that she needed safety and protection. Either there's so many different scenarios that moms find themselves in, and so I can sit there and sympathize and be empathetic towards you because I understand that. And so a beautiful thing is that I think that a lot of moms contemplate abortion, they contemplate adoption, they contemplate so many things. When you learn that you're pregnant, you are faced with the reality of, wow, this is happening, and so a lot of moms don't necessarily go towards the adoption side because of how kind of damaged our system is.
Mhm.
And I would say that it is a hit or miss. I was fortunate to have a really loving family and one that has led me towards Christ. And so, but I know some foster kiddos who just haven't had the same experience. And again,
Mhm.
I want to talk about the abortion side where a lot of people use that for their advantage, where they say, well, this child shouldn't be born because the foster care system isn't as well as it could be. And I'm like,
Mhm.
yes, not everything is as well as it could be, but
Yeah.
it is a chance to live. And there are so many people, like I think of I think it's Chris Chenoweth. She was in foster care and was adopted, and now she's a huge actress. She plays Glinda on The Wizard of Oz and musicals. She is amazing. But that just shows there's so many others who have been adopted and they have been successful through it. And so I'm encouraged by that as an
Mhm.
adoptee. And then I know that birth moms can be encouraged as that if they know that their child is going to be successful. I think that's what every mom thinks about when they are contemplating abortion or adoption. They're like, I want my child to be safe. I want them to have a healthy and happy life. And then I want them to be successful. Those are essentially the three things. And
Mhm.
so abortion, I can tell you right off the bat that that's not going to happen. They're not going to be safe. They're
Mhm.
going to be gone forever. And it's 83% of women who suffer with trauma, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts after having an abortion. Um,
Mhm.
your child is essentially not existent anymore, and that hurts so much more. I don't think so many moms who are either contemplating abortion now or have had an abortion, they live with the guilt and fear of what they did. And I just want to say, as like a believer, that there is no condemnation in Christ. There is nothing that can separate you from the love of Christ, and there is nothing that can separate you from God. And so with that, you are forgiven through your sins, and so I know so many women who have dealt with abortion guilt and guilty for having teenage pregnancies or anything like that. And I think there is a stigma in the church that definitely needs to be fixed, that you can come to the Father in open arms, And so
Mhm.
um, the abortion topic is hard because there's so many things we could talk about. We could talk
Mhm.
about how the abortion pill is now trying to be put into CVS's and pharmacies.
Mhm.
And that's a big thing right now because there are so many young kiddos, like as young as 14, who are getting
Mhm.
pregnant and using that. And not only am I concerned with their mental health, but I'm concerned with their physical health. These
Mhm.
abortion pills are not healthy for their bodies. It
Mhm.
reverses things. It doesn't fully clear out the whole baby. I don't know if anyone who's listening has watched Unplanned, but is an amazing movie that was produced by Abby Johnson. And so she walked us through some of her abortions and how months and years later, there were still particles of that baby that was still like cells in her body that it causes hemorrhaging, it causes blood clots, it causes blood loss, it causes so many things that could be deadly to the mom. And they never talk about that.
Mhm.
Health medical professionals never talk about how the mom can have severe effects from abortion and from abortion pills, but they talk about how it would hurt them to try to find a plan to keep them alive if they're in a dire pregnancy situation, which
Mhm.
is only like 0.01% of the population now because our medical devices have become so
Mhm.
technologically sound and safe. And there are so many doctors who have minds who make up plans that have been helpful for moms in those situations. And so I personally know a mom, I'm not going to name her by name, but she went through a really hard pregnancy and one that was scary for her and her baby. And they are now healthy, they are living and they're thriving. Her baby is very healthy. And so that's just an example that moms can have babies and they're still healthy and they're still living and they're beautiful, even if the doctor diagnoses them with a dire condition. So that's just a beautiful example.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I never like knew those things. Like, those like are amazing. I'm sure the listeners would take so much away from this conversation. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I love speaking with you again. Like, you're seriously are amazing. Keep up with the good work, and I wish you all the best. And I'm sending prayers to you and your family, and I hope everything turns out okay. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you,
coming on.